It was supposed to be a routine meeting. I even brought my coffee with me. Black, no sugar, in the same chipped Architect mug I'd had since my second promotion. 11 years in this place, and not once had I walked into that executive suite without knowing the agenda. Until today, Lara sat at the head of the long walnut table like she owned it. Which, technically now she did. New CEO, new regime. Same bloodline as my wife, Mira, her sister. The one who used to text me for career advice, who once asked me to review her MBA entrance essay. Now she was dressed like a corporate shark, slate gray suit, sleek ponytail, cool red lipstick. There was no warmth in her expression, no family in her eyes, just strategy. And beside her was Jenna from HR, blinking behind thick lenses, her hand already twitching near a manila folder like it weighed too much for her to carry. I didn't sit immediately. I looked at Lara, let the silence stretch long enough for discomfort to start chewing at the edges. You called this meeting? I asked. She smiled, tight and flat. Yes. Please, have a seat. I sat. I didn't sip my coffee. Something in her voice already made it taste like ash. Jenna clicked her pen once, twice, then a third time. A countdown, maybe. A signal. We've reviewed department efficiencies, Lara began. And after careful consideration of current restructuring initiatives. My heart didn't drop. It didn't spike. It just slowed down. Like it was waiting. Your role has been deemed redundant, she said. Effective immediately. No hesitation. No tremor. She even sipped her espresso as she said it, as if this was just another line item on her calendar. My first instinct wasn't rage, it was awe. Not even a week before bonuses. I had just closed 2 major partnerships and had been mentoring half of the new hires in R&D. But none of that mattered. Not to Lara. Not now. She leaned back in the chair I once picked out for this room, Italian leather, ergonomic tilt, and glanced briefly at the gold watch on her wrist. My gift. Last year. Her birthday dinner. I remembered Mira snapping the photo of us at the restaurant, Lara holding her wrist up to the camera like a fashion ad. And now? She couldn't even pretend to be sorry. This isn't personal, she added. Of course not, I replied. I smiled, even though something inside me wanted to snap in half. I glanced at Jenna, whose fingers hovered just above a release agreement. We understand this may come as a surprise, Jenna offered, like she was reading from a script. I almost laughed. It wasn't a surprise. It was a move. Calculated. Executed. Cold. You'll be escorted out after this meeting, Lara said. Security will ensure your belongings are returned to you. I nodded slowly. That watch sparkled under the conference room light. I wondered if she even remembered it was a gift. If she knew she'd worn it to sever the hand that gave it. Do I sign anything now? I asked. You'll have time to review the documents. We suggest consulting counsel before returning them, Jenna said. Her voice was kind, but her eyes never met mine. I picked up my coffee. Still warm. I took one last sip. Then I stood. Well, I said, brushing an invisible crease from my jacket. Thank you both for your time. Lara didn't stand. She just nodded, like a queen waving off a subject. I'll walk you out, Jenna offered. No need, I said. I know the way. I walked out of that room like I had walked out of countless others. Head high, back straight, calm. The hallway smelled of lemon cleaner and soft panic, junior analysts typing fast, interns with headphones in, meetings humming behind glass walls. The company pulse didn't miss a beat. Not even as I walked past the plaque bearing my name on the executive boardroom. I stepped into the elevator alone. As the doors closed, the silence hit. And there it was, not anger, not pain, but something quieter, something sharper. Betrayal. It didn't freeze me. It didn't burn. It buzzed. Like static before a lightning strike. They thought I was disposable. Replaceable. Just a salary line they could cut to show strength. They thought they could humiliate me, strip me of 11 years of work, loyalty, late nights, and strategy meetings. But here's what Lara didn't know, what Mira had clearly forgotten. I had written my own contract. Years ago, when I was negotiating with Darien Shaw, the old CEO who believed in honoring value over politics. And on page 7, buried between performance KPIs and intellectual property clauses, was Section 14B. It stated that in the event of termination without documented cause, I was entitled to 10% of net quarterly profit, effective within the same quarter. Darien had added it himself, called it a security clause to protect his best strategist. No one had questioned it. Until now, no one had triggered it. because no one had been foolish enough to cut me loose. Until Mira. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my secure archive, and opened the PDF version. There it was. Clear. Binding. Legal. Clause 14b. I almost laughed. They thought they were making an example of me. What they had actually done was open the door to a gold mine. The ink from my last deal, a multi-million-dollar infrastructure contract with Halifax Rail, was still fresh. That deal alone was going to spike the quarterly report. And now I was entitled to a tenth of that spike. They wanted to restructure. Well, they just restructured a fortune directly into my pocket. I stepped out of the building into sunlight that felt different, sharper. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I wasn't sad. That would come later, maybe. Right now, I was focused. I stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by city noise, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled, not out of habit, not out of politeness. I smiled because they thought they had one. But the game had just begun, and they didn't even know I was still playing. The moment I got home, I didn't waste time with emotions. No slamming doors, no kicking furniture, no pouring myself a glass of something to cry into. I walked straight into my study, dropped my keys in the bowl by the bookshelf, and sat at the old desk where half of Archinteka's early product models were first sketched out. This was where it all began for me. 11 years of strategy, contracts, pitches, wins, and yes, clauses. My fingers tapped across the keyboard in a rhythm I hadn't used in years. My cloud archive hadn't changed. Everything organized, backed up, cataloged. Even Darian used to joke that I archived better than the legal team. Within minutes, I had the file pulled up, original contract, PDF signed by both parties, time-stamped and verified. Page 7. Section 14b. Still there. Still intact. No expiration. No caveat. Just 10 crisp lines of legalese that, to most people, would read like filler. But to me, they spelled out gold. My breath slowed as I read the clause again, like I was savoring the last piece of a puzzle falling into place. It clearly stated that in the event of termination without documented cause, I would be entitled to 10% of the company's net profit in the same fiscal quarter, excluding performance-based forfeiture or mutual resignation. There was no mutual anything about this. They kicked me out like I was deadweight. But thanks to Darian and a little paranoia on my part back then, I was anything but powerless now. The contract had been negotiated during my third year, after I'd turned Archinteka's failing logistics division into a net positive with 2 quarters to spare. Darian had called me into his office with a scotch in his hand and a smirk on his face. "You're not going anywhere," he said. Not without a parachute big enough to scare them. That clause was the parachute. Back then, it felt almost unnecessary, like putting a vault around a box of receipts. But now it was the only leverage I had. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling through my nose. My mind was already calculating. Laura had fired me with 0 documentation, no warnings, no performance reviews hinting at instability. That alone was enough to trigger the clause. But what made it better, what made it sweeter, was that in the very week she'd cut me, I had closed a deal with Halifax Rail worth millions. And I meant that literally. That deal had been in negotiation for nearly 6 months. I had led every call, drafted every term sheet, reassured every nervous executive on both sides. It was the type of deal that turned a CEO into a legend if timed right. And Laura, ambitious little climber that she was, timed it exactly that way. She fired me and claimed the victory. Mira even sent me a text later that night. "It's for the best. You were always more visionary than stable." Visionary. The same word she used to describe her Instagram famous sister when she got hired to run the company she barely understood. Stable. The word they now twisted to make me sound erratic. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My contract was already saying everything for me. I pulled up the Halifax Rail numbers from my email archive, double-checked the signature timestamps. The deal had closed officially 3 days before my termination. There was no way they could say it wasn't my work. No way they could bury it without creating a paper trail the size of a freight train. I opened my spreadsheet app and did some quick math. Archinteka's net profit over the last 2 quarters had hovered around $80 million. The Halifax deal was projected to bring in a net boost of at least $42 million in the first quarter alone. Assuming standard rollout schedules and current infrastructure demand, 10% of that was $4.2 million. not including other ancillary profits or consulting fees that would snowball from it. Laura had cut me thinking she was making a smart financial move. She didn't know she'd just opened the vault and handed me the keys. I sat in the silence of the study, the hum of the city traffic bleeding in faintly through the window. I wasn't thinking about revenge. Not yet. I was thinking about precision. Strategy. The same way I used to approach hostile takeovers and budget clawbacks. I knew Laura wouldn't roll over easily. She'd try to reframe the narrative, say I was let go for cause. They'd fabricate records, edit timelines, maybe even pull some ancient email chain out of context. I could see it all playing out. I knew how she operated. She learned from Mira. They both believed in pretty lies and prettier optics. I would need someone who could help me hit back before they twisted the blade. But not just any lawyer. Someone who could see through spin, smell a rat before it even crawled. I already had a name in mind. A man I once helped negotiate an acquisition clause for, back when he was going up against a much bigger firm and still came out holding the severance package of a lifetime. Marshall Groves. The guy had a reputation. Not flashy, but vicious. The kind of legal counsel you kept in a locked drawer and only brought out when the walls started to crack. I pulled up his contact and drafted a short email. No theatrics. Just the facts. Marshall, I've been terminated without cause. Clause 14B is now in play. Need a consult. This week. I attached the contract, marked the timestamps, and hit send. As I closed the laptop, I glanced over at the framed photo on my shelf. Me, Mira, and Laura from 4 years ago at the company's 10th anniversary gala. Back when things were still smiles and speeches. Myra's hand rested on my chest in the photo, proud and polished. Laura stood to the side, clutching her champagne glass and wearing the same smile she used now to cut throats. I studied the photo for a moment longer, then turned it face down. There was nothing left in that image worth honoring. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. The air felt different now. Not heavy, not bitter, just sharpened, like something had shifted in the center of my life. And now everything clicked louder, each move, each breath, each step into whatever this was going to become. I wasn't just going to take the payout and walk away. Not if they tried to rewrite history. Not if Mira dared to pretend she didn't know what her sister was doing. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. They thought they could erase me from the story I helped write. But they forgot one thing: authors keep copies. And I still had the pen. Downtown smelled like too many years of disappointment baked into the sidewalk. Everything was concrete and heat and exhaust, and yet, somehow, it felt exactly right for what I was about to do. I found the office tucked between a defunct pawn shop and a falafel place whose best days were 2 owners ago. The sign read Groves and Mathers, Employment and Labor Law, in chipped gold paint, as if it hadn't been updated since dial-up internet. I stepped inside, and the temperature dropped like the walls themselves were tired of playing nice. It smelled like toner, stale coffee, and something darker, something permanent. Like sweat from too many career fights won after everyone else had given up. Marshall Groves didn't have a receptionist. Just a cracked leather couch in the waiting room and a coffee table covered in thick, worn-out legal journals that looked more like weapons than reference material. Before I could even knock, a voice called out from the back. "Come in. Doors open." Gravel. That was the first word that came to mind when I heard his voice. Gravel and cold steel. I pushed open the office door and found him sitting behind a desk that looked like it had taken more hits than a heavyweight boxer. Piles of case files surrounded him like a fortress, and yet he seemed completely unfazed. Marshall Groves looked exactly the same as I remembered, gray hair in a messy sweep, reading glasses perched halfway down his nose, shirt sleeves rolled up like he'd been fighting paperwork since dawn. "You look like hell," he said, not unkindly. "That's how you know I'm serious," I replied, dropping the contract on his desk like a challenge. He didn't touch it right away. Just leaned back in his chair and stared at me with the eyes of a man who'd seen every kind of professional carnage there was. Then he finally reached out, picked up the contract, and started reading. No small talk, no pleasantries, just the steady sound of legal paper flipping under fingers that knew what they were looking for. He found Clause 14B in under a minute. His eyes narrowed. He read it twice, then a third time. When he looked up, there was something in his expression I hadn't seen in years. Not surprise. He didn't get surprised anymore, but approval. "Who wrote this?" he asked. "Darian Shaw," I said. Back when contracts still meant something. He let out a low whistle. Hell of a clause. Hell of a play. Then his eyes cut sharp. They're going to say it was for costs. I nodded. Only way out. Which means they'll be prepping fake records. Late performance reviews. Email threads out of context. They'll make it sound like you were about to be disciplined or dismissed anyway. They'll probably backdate a few things, I added. Use HR as cover. Lara's cold enough to push it, and Mira, well, let's just say she's not going to stop her sister. Marshall didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough spousal silence to know what kind of knife it became when aimed right. You still got access to your cloud archive? He asked. I nodded. All time-stamped. All backed up. Contracts, deal memos, Halifax rail correspondence, everything. That got his attention. Halifax? Yeah, I said. Closed the deal 3 days before they canned me. Multi-million-dollar infrastructure contract. They're trying to bury it until after bonuses. Marshall leaned forward, like a shark catching scent. That alone makes this explosive. You're not just entitled to your 10%. You're also looking at potential misrepresentation if they filed anything with shareholders. That's the goal, I said. Not just to get paid. To make it hurt if they try to lie. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that came before someone rolled up their sleeves and started flipping tables. You want war? He asked. I want clarity, I said. But if they make it war, I won't blink. Marshall opened a drawer and pulled out a yellow notepad. He started jotting things down. Questions, dates, names. We'll need to move fast, he muttered. They're going to circle the wagons the moment they sense movement. HR will sanitize your file. IT will wipe logs. Legal will try to claim performance-based metrics were under review. Then we get ahead of them, I said. I know someone still inside. Someone who keeps track of everything. Someone loyal? Loyal enough, I said. His name's Theo Santiago. Analyst. Bright. Detail-obsessed. The kind of guy who screenshots Slack conversations for fun. Good, Marshall said. We'll need raw data. Metadata. Not summaries. Originals. He leaned back and folded his arms. This clause isn't just valid, it's a landmine. But it only works if we can prove they knew what they were doing when they pulled the trigger. That means we document the timing, the motive, and the forgeries. They think I'm just going to disappear, I said. They think they got away with it. Let them think that, Marshall said. Let them believe you're licking your wounds. The longer they feel safe, the more careless they get. That's when we strike. For the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. Not hope. Not yet. But the first brick in a foundation I could stand on. Marshall wasn't going to fix everything, but he was going to make sure that if they wanted to burn me down, they'd have to light themselves on fire to do it. He handed me a small USB drive. This has a secure upload channel, he said. Send me everything. Contracts, emails, correspondence. Anything you touched in the last 2 quarters. I'll handle the filings. I nodded and pocketed it. Then he stood, stretched like a man preparing for a long battle, and walked over to the bookshelf behind him. He pulled out an old hardbound volume, flipped through the pages, and marked something with a post-it. Just in case this goes federal, he said. There's precedent. They'll try to claim corporate confidentiality, but that won't hold against fraud. They fired me like I was a virus, I said. Now they're going to learn I'm more like a mutation. Marshall chuckled. Good. Stay cold. Stay focused. And don't tell anyone you've got me yet. The element of surprise is your first weapon. I shook his hand. His grip was firm, no nonsense, no posturing. Just pressure. Just steel. As I walked out of the office, past the faded legal books and the walls lined with dusty certificates, I felt something shift inside me. Not vengeance. Not yet. But something just as sharp. Intention. They thought they cut off a limb. What they didn't know was that I still had claws. I waited until after dark to text Theo. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I knew how easily Archintech monitored its systems. Even outside the building, their shadow extended through inboxes, Slack, and phone records. I didn't want to give anyone a reason to suspect he was still loyal to me. Or worse, make him a target. So I used the encrypted app we'd set up years ago during the early acquisition phase when data leaks had been a daily threat. Just a simple message, meet me at Maven's Cafe. Corner booth. Usual hour. Bring nothing digital. He replied 5 minutes later. Got it. Maven's had always been a kind of hideaway. Dim lighting, jazz humming low from vintage speakers, and a corner booth so tucked away it practically encouraged secrets. It used to be our unofficial war room during product launches and investor nights. I got there early and ordered black coffee, no sugar. It tasted like wet cardboard, but that wasn't the point. I needed something to do with my hands. I'd barely taken a second sip when Theo slipped in, hoodie drawn low, eyes darting like he'd been followed. He looked thinner, paler, the kind of exhaustion you can't sleep off. "I'm not paranoid," he said as he sat down, "but they're definitely watching anyone who used to be close to you." I leaned in, kept my tone calm. "Then let's give them nothing." He nodded, pulling out a worn leather notebook. No laptop, no phone, just ink. "Smart." We sat in silence for a few beats before he exhaled and said, "They've already started rewriting your history." I said nothing. Let him explain. "They're claiming you were under review," he said, flipping to a page. "That your performance declined over the last 3 quarters. They have bullet points, charts, even some old feedback snippets pulled from unrelated projects to make it look real. Any of it documented before my termination?" I asked. He shook his head. "That's the thing. The internal timestamps are recent, within the last 48 hours. I smiled bitterly. "So they're forging it. Just like we expected." "It gets worse," he said, lowering his voice. "They're delaying the Halifax rail announcement. Internally, they're calling it a Q2 marketing decision. But I've seen the projections. The profit spike is massive. $42 million minimum. And they're planning to announce it after bonuses clear. So Lara gets credit," I muttered. "And my termination doesn't look like theft. It looks like strategy." Theo nodded. "The narrative is that she's streamlining the executive team, trimming the fat. Vision without waste." Her exact words. I leaned back, let that phrase settle. I used to say that about product features, cutting bloat to highlight value. Now it was being turned on me like a scalpel. Myra's sister had always been clever with words. But I knew her weakness, details. She never checked the things she thought were beneath her. Like legal clauses. Like metadata. "I need everything, Theo," I said. "The Halifax projections. The timestamp logs on their performance reviews. Anything you can get that shows they're falsifying records." He nodded. "I figured. I've been backing things up to a private archive. Air-gapped. No cloud. No trace. It's taking time because I can't trigger IT alerts. But I'll get you the originals." I studied his face. Theo wasn't built for corporate war. He was quiet, loyal, meticulous, but not hardened. This wasn't just risking a job for him. It was risking his peace. "You sure about this?" I asked. "I owe you more than they ever will," he said. "You're the reason I got out of that data analyst pit. You gave me chances no one else did. I remember that. Loyalty like that doesn't come often. And when it does, you guard it like gold." He scribbled something in his notebook, tore out the page, and slid it to me. It listed file names, locations, internal document IDs, and the names of employees who had accessed or edited them in the last 2 days. It was a blueprint of the cover-up. "Keep this safe," he said. "Burn it after you use it." I folded the page once and slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket. "They watching you directly?" He hesitated. "Not obviously. But I got pulled into a random HR check-in this morning. How are you adjusting to the new leadership? That kind of crap." I nodded slowly. "They're probing, seeing who might leak." Theo looked around the cafe, voice barely audible now. "And Mira, she's not talking to you?" I shook my head. "She sent one text after the firing. No apology, just a justification. She's all in with Lara now," he said. "They act like they built the company from scratch." "They didn't," I replied. "But they're about to learn what happens when you try to cut the architect out of the blueprints." Theo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You always did know how to burn a bridge with style." I finished my coffee and placed the mug gently on the table. "This time, I'm not burning anything. I'm just making sure they walk out onto a bridge that isn't there." He passed me one last piece of paper, handwritten hashes that matched the document versions stored on the company server. "If they try to alter these after I pull them, you'll know. Compare them to these hashes. Any difference means tampering." I looked at him and saw the fear behind the focus. "They won't come after you, Theo. I'll make sure of it." "I'm not worried about me," he said. "I'm worried about what happens if you lose." I paused. "I'm not going to lose." He believed me. Not because of bravado, but because he'd seen what I could do when my back was to the wall. This wasn't about pride. This was about the truth. And the truth, when weaponized correctly, was more lethal than any revenge. We stood and exchanged a quick nod. No handshake. No goodbyes. Just an understanding. As I stepped back out into the night, the cold air felt sharper, like it was slicing through the last layers of shock and dragging me fully into focus. I pulled the note from my pocket and read it again under the dim light of a street lamp. Each file name was a match to a lie Lara was building. And now I had the key to dismantle every one of them. They thought erasing me would be clean, easy, final. But what they'd really done was leave a thread hanging, and I had just started pulling. The zip file arrived at 3:17 a.m. I was awake, not because I'd set an alarm, but because I hadn't slept. There's a kind of tension that anchors itself beneath your skin when you're this close to the edge, the kind that turns hours into ash and silence into sirens. I've been lying on the couch in my study, watching the seconds change on the digital clock like it owed me answers. When the notification pinged, I didn't hesitate. I sat up, cracked my knuckles, and plugged in the USB Marshall had given me. No internet. No Wi-Fi. I wasn't about to risk exposure. I opened the folder and saw 4 Word documents and 1 Excel file, all encrypted, all from Theo. The file names were almost comically bland: Q4 Assessment _ Draft 1, Peer Review _ Compile 3, Executive Summary. Exactly the kind of digital camouflage corporate fraud hides behind. But the real truth wasn't in the words. It was in the metadata. I dragged the files into a forensic tool I'd installed hours earlier, a silent watchdog I hadn't used since my own days deep in product compliance. I opened the first Word doc, the supposed performance review Lara's team had written up for me. The contents weren't surprising. Phrases like inconsistent focus, strained team rapport, and resistance to leadership evolution. It was laughable, vague, artificial, stitched together like a bad ransom note from someone who barely skimmed my resume. But what mattered was the metadata. Created 2 days ago. Last modified, same day. Author? Not my former supervisor. Not HR. A junior admin assistant with no prior history working on executive reviews. I opened the next file. Then the next. Same pattern. Same timestamps. Same sloppiness. Marshall had warned me they'd forge it all. But seeing it in black and white, watching them try to rewrite my history with files created after my firing, was something else. Something ugly. Something deeply, viscerally satisfying. They didn't just lie. They got lazy, arrogant, entitled enough to believe no one would check behind the curtain. That kind of mistake was priceless. Then I opened the spreadsheet. It took a moment to load. Thousands of rows, color-coded projections, tabs referencing budget allocations, future revenue, bonus structures, and most importantly, deal revenue breakdowns. I scrolled through the cells like I was peeling back skin. And there it was, tabbed neatly under Q1 forecast. Project Halifax, net profit addition, $42.8 million. Notes, contribution attributed to strategic closure under new leadership. Delay formal reporting until April 5th to coincide with shareholder call. Delay formal reporting. Not to give the team time to validate. Not to finalize distribution, but to spin it. To make it look like Lara had landed the deal. That I'd been dead weight. And that this sudden windfall had arrived the moment I was gone. I closed my eyes and exhaled. It wasn't just greed. It was storytelling. They wanted to make her look like the savior of a struggling company. And to do that, they needed a villain. Me. I copied everything. Metadata logs, file hash codes, modified user histories, version timestamps, and dropped them into a separate, encrypted vault for Marshall. Then I created a visual report. Not for legal purposes. Not yet. For impact. For clarity. I wanted every lie they told to scream in bright red and be timestamped down to the second. When the upload was complete, I called Marshall. He answered on the second ring. I've got it, I said. They forged the reviews. All the docs were created after my termination. And the Halifax file confirms the delay is for optics. I could hear him pacing. You have authorship data? Every file shows internal IDs. Admin-level access. No supervisory sign-off. They didn't even bother hiding the breadcrumbs. He whistled low. Idiots. Entitled idiots, I corrected. You know what this means, right? He said, voice sharper now. This isn't just wrongful termination anymore. This is fraud. They've fabricated evidence to avoid contractual payout. And if they're delaying financial disclosures for shareholder gain, that's borderline securities fraud. I want to hit them clean, I said. No theatrics. No leaks. I want it all to land on their desk in one blow. You'll get it, he replied. We hit them with hard copies first, then file for breach. That'll force a response. They'll either settle or try to bury us in corporate procedure. But now we've got timestamps. They can't change the clocks. I stared at the spreadsheet again, eyes tracing the column labeled bonus allocation, Q1 executive tier. Lara's name was at the top. Her projected payout was $612,000, tied directly to Halifax's performance. They hadn't just fired me for optics. They'd fired me so they could take credit and carve up the spoils. They thought I wouldn't fight, I said quietly. No, Marshall said. They thought you wouldn't be smart enough to win. I ended the call and sat back, fingers still buzzing from the keyboard. The room felt quieter now. The static that had followed me since the day Lara pushed me out finally began to lift. But this wasn't over. Not yet. I sent a separate message to Theo. Just 2 words. We're ready. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Nothing more. Smart. Safe. I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window. The city blinked in tired neon, each light a reminder of everything Architect had taken and everything I was about to reclaim. My phone buzzed again, a message from Marshall this time. He had one sentence. This ends in a conference room. I smiled. Let it. Because the next time I sat across from Lara, I wouldn't be the one getting walked out of the building. She would. It was the last place I expected to meet someone willing to throw gasoline on a corporate fire. A bowling alley on the edge of downtown, tucked between a discount liquor store and a strip of darkened storefronts. The carpet was tacky, the air reeked of nacho cheese and ancient sweat, and the neon signs hummed like broken thoughts. But it was neutral, anonymous, loud enough to drown out suspicion. When I walked in, Terrence Bloom was already there, lane 24, shoes on, rolling practice frames like he didn't just lose his career 2 weeks ago. He spotted me and waved me over with the kind of energy that didn't match the circles under his eyes. When I got closer, I could see it, tension coiled beneath his casual slouch, the haunted look of a man who knew too much and held it anyway. I figured you'd call, he said. Handing me a chipped bowling ball like this was just some Wednesday hobby and not the preamble to corporate warfare. Word gets around. Theo's careful, but not invisible. I set the ball down and looked at him. I need what you know. He nodded, grabbing his water bottle, unscrewing the cap slowly. They told me I was too slow, he said. Didn't adapt to Lara's leadership culture. But what they meant was, I asked too many questions about the numbers. I didn't say anything. I let him talk. I've been a senior accountant there for 9 years. I've seen the books through 3 different CFOs. You think I didn't notice when Callum Rivers started ordering late quarter adjustments on closed deals? He laughed, but it was hollow. They changed the timeline on the Halifax deal. Tried to push it into Q2. Said it was a clerical error. That's not clerical, I said. That's criminal. He finally looked at me, dead center. They didn't just fire you to save money. They fired you because you were a liability to the story they were trying to sell. Lara's whole narrative is built on that deal being her first big win. You were the architect. So they cut the architect and painted her as the genius. And you? I asked. Why cut you? Because I had the raw ledgers, he said, lowering his voice. I saw the original revenue logs before the revision. I asked Callum about it in an email. Didn't accuse him. Just asked. That afternoon, HR called me in. Said I wasn't aligned with forward strategy. Fired me on the spot. Severance? Minimal. Not even a thank you after almost a decade. I exhaled. Slow. You have the logs? He nodded. More than that. I pulled the server snapshots. Every file version. Pre- and post-adjustment. It's all here. He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a flash drive, placing it gently in my hand like it was a relic from a sacred war. I haven't shared this with anyone else. But you? You're going to do something with it. I am, I said. You willing to testify if it comes to that? He didn't answer right away. He stared out at the pins, watching the automatic sweeper drag across the lane like it was erasing something. I've got a kid starting college next fall, he said. A mortgage. And a reputation they're already trying to smudge. If I don't stand up now, they'll bury me. So yeah, I'll testify. I pocketed the drive. You'll be protected. Marshall's already working on the legal angle. He chuckled again, this time with a flicker of something harder behind it. I've read about Groves. Bulldog in a suit, right? He's worse, I said. In a good way. Good, Terrence replied. Because you're not just up against Lara. You're up against a company built on pretending ethics are optional. A group of teens 2 lanes over screamed as one of them bowled a strike. For a second, the world felt too loud, too normal. Like none of this should be happening in a place with nacho cheese dispensers and sticky floors. But maybe that's exactly why it was perfect. The best secrets are always exchanged in places no one would ever suspect. You ever regret it? I asked, not entirely sure why. What? Being the guy who noticed. He looked at me, that tired accountant face weathered by 1,000 spreadsheets and 1,000 compromises. Every damn day, he said. But I'd regret it more if I pretended I didn't. I nodded. There was nothing left to say. We bowled a few rounds after that. Didn't talk much. Just let the thud of the ball and the crash of pins speak for us. When I finally stood to leave, Terrence offered his hand. It was a solid grip, no hesitation. Take them down, he said. I plan to, I replied. And you're getting something out of this too. He gave me a look. Like what? Closure. No, I said. A consulting fee. $250. Non-negotiable. He blinked. 250,000? You're a whistleblower with documentation that could bury them. That's worth more than a thank you. You'll get it the day I get my settlement. His eyes glistened, just a flicker. He nodded once, hard. You're serious. Deadly. He slung the duffel over his shoulder and walked away, disappearing into the fluorescent shadows of the arcade room. I watched him go, holding onto the flash drive like it was a loaded weapon, because that's what it was. Back in my car, I sat for a minute before plugging the drive into my offline laptop. The files loaded fast. They were clean, real, unfiltered, raw ledger entries, time-stamped spreadsheets, server logs showing the original Halifax profit entered into Q1, then the edits, then the call from Callum's email instructing the shift to Q2 for strategic framing. It was all there, black and white. Greed in motion. I uploaded everything to the secure folder Marshall had set up. Then I backed it up twice, once to a private cloud and once to a hidden drive I kept taped under the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. This wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. This was an avalanche waiting to happen. And I had just found the next brick that would make the whole mountain come down. I walked into Archintech like I'd never left. Same revolving glass doors. Same echo in the marble lobby. Same overpolished receptionist desk where they used to greet me with first-name smiles and fresh coffee. Today, no one smiled. The receptionist barely looked up. Her headset crackled, her screen blinked, and when she glanced at me, it was with the quiet panic of someone who'd been told not to make eye contact. I didn't say a word, just kept walking. Security didn't stop me. Marshall had already cleared the meeting with legal, and the conference room had been booked under neutral terms. Dispute Resolution Review. A gentle title for what was about to unfold. The conference room itself was ridiculous. Glass walls, chrome fixtures, a skyline view designed to impress board members and intimidate outsiders. Today, it looked like a sterile stage set for a play where everyone knew the ending, but still had to say the lines anyway. Laura sat at the head of the table in her usual Ice Queen attire. Black blazer, no jewelry aside from that gold watch I once gave her, and a neutral expression so polished it could have been printed. On her left were 2 corporate lawyers in tailored suits who looked like they ate NDAs for breakfast. Across from her was Callum Rivers, the CFO, whose jaw twitched every time his name came up in financial news alerts. I noted the tension in his shoulders. Good. He should be sweating. Mira wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. She wouldn't face me. Not when she'd stood by while her sister took a blade to my career. And honestly, I was better off without the distraction of her silence. Marshall stood beside me, rolling up his sleeves the way some men do before a brawl. He didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't greet anyone. He just pulled out a portable projector, placed it on the table, and looked directly at Laura. We're going to begin now, he said flatly. No one objected, not even the suits. Marshall clicked a button, and the projection came to life against the far glass wall. Document logs, file names, timestamp trails. He moved quickly, methodically, like a surgeon exposing rot. Let's begin with these, he said, pointing at 4 documents in red. These are the performance reviews your office submitted as justification for Mr. Mercer's termination. Each of them contains metadata indicating they were created after the date of his dismissal. Not just edited, created. One of the lawyers opened his mouth, but Marshall cut him off. We verified authorship, file history, and even the internal ID of the machine used. It belongs to your HR assistant, not the department head. Which means these weren't documents created through standard performance review channels. They were invented. Post-fact, Lara didn't blink. She leaned forward, fingers laced like she was waiting for her moment to strike. There must be a mistake. Those files were updated in the system as part of a backlog clearance. That doesn't imply intent. Marshall's voice stayed level. No. But what does imply intent is the email from Callum Rivers instructing the review documents be positioned for optics in preparation for Mr. Mercer's departure. That email was sent 2 days after the termination. Callum stiffened. One of the lawyers turned to him. Lara didn't. Marshall clicked again. The Halifax rail file came up next. Cells lit up. Formulas exposed. This is the projected Q1 revenue as of March 18th. The Halifax deal added $42.8 million to net profit. Originally filed under Q1. Then, on March 23rd, that line item was reclassified under Q2. Just 2 days after Mr. Mercer's firing, Callum finally spoke. That reclassification was for reporting consistency. Legal advised we. No, they didn't, Marshall snapped. Because I contacted your legal compliance team directly. They had no record of that directive, which means you acted without authority. And in doing so, restructured financial reporting to manipulate executive bonus metrics. The room went silent. Cold. Heavy. I watched Lara's jaw tighten. Her eyes didn't move from the wall, but I knew her. I could see the calculation forming. How much to deny, how far to push, when to fold. I waited. Let it hang. Then Marshall clicked again, and this time, Terrence's data logs appeared. Internal financial snapshots from your server. Pulled by your senior accountant, Terrence Bloom, 2 days before his own sudden dismissal. They show the original ledger entries and the edits made on the 23rd. They also contain metadata tying the adjustments to Mr. Rivers' credentials. Callum turned pale. His mouth opened, closed, then stayed shut. Lara finally spoke. This meeting was scheduled to address a contractual dispute. You've now accused us of fraud without evidence admissible in court. Marshall smiled, not kindly. Oh, it's admissible. And you know it. The contract, signed by Darian Shaw, grants Mr. Mercer 10% of net quarterly profit if terminated without cause. That clause remains binding. Your attempt to justify the termination post-event, using fabricated documentation, is not just invalid. It's grounds for civil damages. I leaned forward then. Calm. Measured. You didn't just try to cut me. You tried to erase me. Forge a story. Take my deal and pretend I was never in the room. You built your narrative with scissors and glue, hoping no one would look closely enough to see the seams. Lara's lips parted like she wanted to say something. Deny, diminish, deflect. But one of the lawyers leaned toward her and whispered. She didn't like what she heard. The watch on her wrist gleamed under the overhead light. For the first time since I walked in, she looked unsure. We're willing to discuss a settlement, she said. Marshall tilted his head. Full payout. 10% of Q1's net profit, plus compensation for damages incurred through false documentation. You'll also issue a written statement clarifying Mr. Mercer's departure was not for costs. And if we don't agree, one of the lawyers asked. Then we file, Marshall said. And we notify the board. And the press. And, if necessary, federal authorities. No threats. Just fact. And fact was the one thing this room couldn't spin. Lara hesitated. Then nodded once. You'll get it by Tuesday, she said. I stood. Adjusted my jacket. Looked right at her. No hard feelings, I said. Just expensive ones. Then I walked out. The conference room stayed behind me, frozen like a scene from a play that never quite reached its climax. But I had. And the curtain was closing. Not on me on them. They expected me to accept the settlement quietly. Just nod, sign, walk out with a check and a gag order like some overpaid casualty. That's how these things usually go. Silence for money. Reputation traded for resolution. But they didn't fire the kind of man who disappears. They fired the kind of man who reads every page, who keeps receipts, who shows up to the negotiating table with more than scars. So when I returned the next day to finalize the deal, I didn't come alone, and I didn't come for crumbs. Marshall walked in 2 steps ahead of me, suit pressed, jaw set, briefcase in hand. I carried nothing but a folder with my terms. No emotion. No small talk. Just business, sharpened like a blade. They were already seated when we arrived. Laura again at the head of the table, same crisp blazer, same gold watch, but now her posture was more defensive, arms tighter, lips pursed, eyes scanning like she was hoping for an exit before the real damage started. Her lawyers flanked her again, and Callum was absent this time. I figured he'd been advised to lie low while legal decided whether to offer him up as sacrificial meat or keep him buried beneath non-disclosure agreements. Either way, it didn't matter. I wasn't here to fight anymore. I was here to collect. Marshall opened with the numbers. 10% of net Q1 profits, which, as per the revised Halifax contract and original ledgers, totals $4.28 million. Payment to be wired in full by Tuesday. No delays, no partial disbursements. One of the lawyers started to speak, but Laura raised her hand. We've agreed to that. Good, I said, laying my folder on the table. But that's not all. Laura didn't flinch, but her lawyer leaned in again. I didn't wait for permission. I opened the folder and slid a printed document across the table. This is a consulting agreement for Terrence Bloom. One-time payment of $250,000 for professional services rendered in Q1. The services won't be specified. It's clean, and it's your way of thanking him for 9 years of service without dragging this into whistleblower territory. Lara's brows pinched. You're asking us to pay him $250,000 to keep quiet. No, I said calmly. I'm telling you he's going to get it, because if he doesn't, he becomes a second plaintiff. And unlike me, he still has friends on the inside of accounting. You don't want 2 lawsuits. One will already cost you more than money. Marshall slid another paper forward. You'll sign the agreement. Issue a standard HR statement verifying Bloom's time at the company. Nothing exaggerated, but nothing damaging. No red flags. Laura said nothing. Her eyes darted toward her legal team, but her silence said more than any argument could. She knew the real weight of what we were holding. There's one more thing, I said. I pulled out a crisp envelope with Theo's name at the top. A letter of recommendation for Theo Santiago. Signed by you, Laura. It will state that he performed at or above expectations in all reviewed quarters and that his departure, should it occur, would be entirely voluntary. This letter will be delivered to him today. Her jaw tightened. That's not your concern. It is, I said. Because if Theo's name ends up on a layoff list next quarter, or if he gets quietly blackballed through reference calls, I'll consider the settlement void and we'll go public with every forged doc we found. Marshall chimed in. You're lucky he's asking for this instead of blood. Frankly, I advised him to be less generous. One of the lawyers whispered something, then nodded slowly. Laura sighed. Not loud, not theatrical, just a quiet exhale, the kind people make when they know the next words out of their mouth won't matter. She looked at me, and for the first time, the mask cracked. Just slightly. You really think this makes us even? I stared at her. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. Just the truth. No. I think this keeps you employed. Or at least out of court. But if you're asking whether this restores what you broke, then no. It doesn't come close. She signed the consulting agreement for Terrence first. Then the letter for Theo. Her signature was neat, practiced. Like she'd been doing this her whole life. Like this wasn't the first time she cleaned up after herself with pen strokes and paper smiles. When she finished, I stood. Marshall packed up the documents and confirmed the wiring instructions once more. We didn't shake hands. We didn't thank each other. I just nodded once and walked out, the folder now thick with signed compliance. On the way out, Marshall smirked. That went smoother than I expected. Because they know it's not over, I said. He looked at me. You still planning to go public? I didn't answer. Not because I hadn't decided, but because I didn't need to say it aloud. Some choices feel better when they're left in the air, unfinished, hanging like a loaded sentence waiting for someone else to breathe wrong. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed with 2 messages. One from Terrence, are you serious? And one from Theo, got the letter. I don't know what to say. I replied to Terrence, yes, you earned it. To Theo, say it in your interview. In San Diego. They were both free now. That mattered more than a headline. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, fingers gripping the wheel like it was the last thing tethering me to the man I'd been before all this. A man who once believed loyalty could shield you. That family meant safety. That competence protected you from betrayal. Now I knew better. The air tasted different as I pulled out of the garage. Cleaner. The weight was still there, sure, but it shifted. It didn't sit on my chest anymore. It stood beside me, like a reminder. A presence I'd carry into every boardroom and every contract from here on. They tried to write me out of the story. I'd made sure I was written in ink. The wire transfer hit at exactly 9:02 a.m. on Tuesday morning. No call, no warning, just a buzz from my banking app and a number staring back at me that almost didn't look real. For $1,280,000. It sat there like a quiet confession, like the company was whispering, "We're sorry," without ever saying the words. I stared at the screen for a long time, longer than I probably needed to, watching the numbers flicker under the morning light spilling through my study window. I expected to feel elation, vindication, something grand. But what came over me was far simpler, quiet. Not peace. Not yet. But the first real silence I'd felt since Laura sat across from me and told me I was no longer needed. I didn't wait. The first thing I did was call the bank, initiate the mortgage payout, and reassign the house. Mira had always wanted it in both our names, something about equality and shared ground. But now, I wanted no gray areas, no footholds. I paid off the entire balance and filed the paperwork to transfer the deed into my name only. It was surgical, fast, clean. She'd know what it meant. No text, no email, just a FedEx envelope on her doorstep in 2 days, signed and stamped. She wouldn't have to guess. Next, I pulled up Terrence's information and sent the wire transfer for his consulting fee. $250,000, exactly as promised. I attached a short message. Paid in full. You deserve more, but this will start. His response came 3 minutes later. Just a photo, his daughter, standing in front of a college acceptance letter, grinning like the world finally made space for her. No words, just that image. It said everything. Then I booked a business class flight for Theo. San Diego. Interview already lined up, hotel paid for, travel stipend wired directly to his account. I threw in a handwritten note on Architect letterhead. I still had some tucked in a drawer somewhere. Go build something that matters. Somewhere they don't ask you to lie for promotions. By 10:30, I was standing in the center of the kitchen with my phone face down on the table and the window open just wide enough to let the spring air drift in. It smelled like possibility, like movement, like the end of something stale. Then came the email. From Mira. Subject line, I didn't know. 3 words in the body. I didn't know. That was it. No apology. No explanation. No, how are you? Or can we talk? Just a cold sentence delivered like a fire alarm with no smoke. I stared at the screen, waiting for something to rise inside me, grief, fury, even curiosity. But all I felt was exhaustion. Not the kind that sends you to bed. The kind that makes you question why you ever gave someone the map to your soul and thought they wouldn't redraw it in their favor. She didn't ask how I was holding up, didn't ask if the house had arrived in her name, or if she still had access to the shared accounts. She didn't ask if I was angry, if I'd ever forgive her. She only wanted to know one thing. Are you going public? The silence that followed was louder than any answer I could have given. I didn't respond. She'd understand the message. I wasn't interested in revenge. That would have required caring. And I'd run out of care somewhere between the forged documents and the moment she stood beside Laura while I was being escorted out of a building I helped build. The fireworks didn't come with headlines or exposés. No leaks to the press. No anonymous blog posts. The explosions were quieter, more surgical. Laura announced she was stepping back from her role as CEO for health reasons, though the board knew it was anything but. No one challenges financial manipulation and keeps the corner office, no matter how pretty the optics. Callum submitted a personal leave of absence that no one expected him to return from. The company's quarterly statement included the Halifax numbers, but also contained a footnote referencing internal reporting inconsistencies. Legal speak for, we got caught, but won't say how. People noticed. Quietly. A few former colleagues reached out, not with pity, but with questions. One asked if I'd ever speak publicly. Another wondered if I planned to start something new. A recruiter emailed me from a firm in Boston offering to fly me in for a keynote on corporate resilience. I turned it down. I wasn't interested in applause. I'd already been heard. Instead, I drove north 200 miles of highway silence until the city disappeared in the rearview mirror and trees started outnumbering buildings. The lake house wasn't extravagant. 2 stories, modest deck, stocked kitchen, wide windows. What mattered was what it didn't have, noise. No doorbell. No corporate emails. No one calling me into a glass box to explain metrics they barely understood. I unpacked slow, set the bag by the fireplace, opened a bottle of champagne I'd been saving for a promotion that never came. The cork popped like punctuation. I poured a glass and stepped out onto the deck. The lake was still. Morning mist rolled off it like a secret, and for the first time in months, I let my breath fall out without shaping it into strategy. I wasn't rich now, at least not in the way Laura or Mira would define it. But I was free, and freedom was louder than any bonus. That night, I sat by the fireplace and pulled out my tablet. I didn't open social media. I didn't draft a manifesto. I logged into a simple, anonymous employee review platform and left a message. No names, no slander, just truth. Beware of sudden restructuring near quarterly ends. Profits mean pink slips. And sometimes, leadership sacrifices integrity for optics. Read your contract. Memorize your metadata. Loyalty is a virtue they'll quote right before they cut your throat. I hit submit. Turned the screen off. Took another sip of champagne. No applause. No crowd. No press conference. Just quiet fireworks. And the knowledge that every single person who ever thought I'd walk away empty-handed would have to live with the truth. I walked away holding everything that mattered. Weeks passed like slow waves rolling over a shoreline I no longer recognized. I didn't miss the calendar reminders, the buzz of Slack notifications, the hollow applause of boardroom victories built on silence and sacrifice. I didn't miss being tolerated by people who once smiled at me because they needed my numbers to look good. What I did miss, surprisingly, was the clarity that came from surviving something like that. When everything is stripped away, what's left is sharp, focused, clean. I spent most mornings on the lake house deck with a mug of black coffee and no deadlines, no calls. Some nights, I watched the sky change and thought of how little it takes to lose years. A sentence, a meeting, a signature. But it takes something else entirely to take them back. Then one evening, I opened my laptop, not to log into anything or chase a lead, but to write a review. Not out of bitterness, not even out of defiance, but because stories matter, especially the ones people try to erase. I navigated to an employee review site. Anonymous, no frills. The kind of place people go when they're finally ready to admit what they endured. I didn't name Laura. I didn't mention Mira. I didn't include Archintech in the title or call anyone out directly. I didn't have to. The people who needed to understand would know. I just wrote, beware of sudden restructuring near quarterly ends. Profits mean pink slips. And sometimes, leadership sacrifices integrity for optics. Read your contract. Memorize your metadata. Loyalty is a virtue they'll quote right before they cut your throat. I hit post. Closed the tab. Walked away from the screen and back out to the deck where the trees rustled without judgment. No response came that night. None the next. But by the weekend, I got an alert. An old colleague had reached out. Then another. Former junior execs. A couple interns I'd mentored. They read the review. They knew who wrote it. They didn't ask for confirmation. They just sent messages like, "Thank you for saying it. We suspected. We always wondered how they got away with it." I didn't respond to most. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd already said what needed saying. Still, one message stuck. A recruiter. She wasn't offering a job. She was organizing a corporate ethics conference in Boston and wanted me to speak. Your story is what people need to hear. You don't have to name names. Just tell the truth. I declined. I didn't need a microphone. I didn't want to build a brand off my scars. What mattered to me was the quiet. The dignity in knowing I'd gone through fire and hadn't come out begging to be held. I'd come out clean. Not untouched, but whole. I spent the next few days painting a wall in the guest room, cleaning out old papers, fixing a broken hinge on the porch swing. Things that didn't scream victory, but felt like ownership. Like life belonged to me again. One morning, I lit a fire in the living room even though it wasn't cold, just because I could. I sat down beside it, watching the flames eat their way through dry wood, and I let myself breathe like I wasn't waiting for the next betrayal to come knocking. There was no next betrayal, just peace. It was small. It was quiet. It was mine.